Hello and welcome once again. This is Jennifer McGuire. I have to apologize because I'm very sick, so my voice sounds a little off, but I really wanted to bring you today's video. Today I am going back to the basics and doing a technique that we all often forget about, and that is direct to paper. So Hero Arts is celebrating their 45th anniversary. They've been making stamps for 45 years, and Hero Arts is definitely my favorite company. I used to work for them for a long time and learned all of my stamping from them. So I am very honored to be participating today in their celebration. Now they, for their 45th anniversary, decided to bring back stamps from the vault, so older images, so that we could relive those olden days of stamping. So I thought I'd bring back an older technique. I had such fun using these classic images with the classic technique of direct to paper. The nice thing about direct to paper is any inks will work, and I will show you a variety of ideas for this technique today. Now, for most of my cards, I will be using the new Hero Arts Hero Hues Reactive inks. But again, you can use what you have. This is a very smooth ink. It's a hybrid ink. This ink stamps beautifully because it has both dye and pigment ink properties. And because they're so smooth, they blend great with any type of ink blending tool. I really like the color palette. I'm missing a few of the brighter blue colors, but you can see the happy color palette that Hero Arts has come out with. They even included a white. Now there are fun techniques that you can do with water using these inks, which I'll show you. But in most cases, I just use these inks because they're smooth and go onto paper so nicely. Okay, so let's start by doing some direct to paper inking techniques, and then I will show you some simple card designs, but a few tricks along the way. Now, my first direct to paper technique is a fun way of dragging your ink onto your paper to form a circle of colors. I wanted a smaller circle, so I'm using the side or the end of the ink pad. But if you wanted a larger circle to cover the entire card front, you could drag the longer side of the ink pad. Now, I'm not going for a solid result here. If I wanted a solid result, I could press the ink pad firmly, and that would provide a nice solid circle of color. I wanted to have that dragging motion. I think it really adds a lot of texture to what will be a very simple card design when I pull these together. So dragging an ink pad across your cardstock is a very common way to do direct to paper, and I'll have some more examples with that. Next, I wanted to show you another way that people often forget to do direct to paper, and it is definitely the easiest. You just take your ink pad and press down lightly onto cardstock. I like to layer a few different colors of ink on top of each other. What is cool about this is the felt pad on the ink pad leaves kind of like a linen texture of ink onto your cardstock. So it's just a beautiful, soft, subtle texture and a great way to mix colors. I do find that I like direct to paper inking techniques best if my ink pad is a felt pad, which most dye inks are. Now in this case, I'm once again dragging my ink onto paper. I start on one side with the pool party ink and on the other side with green, allowing the colors to overlap in the middle. This is a great way to create a gradient look of color. Another way to do this same technique is on textured paper. So I'm using Tim Holtz watercolor paper because one side has some beautiful texture to it. I'm again dragging the ink pads across the paper, but I'm doing so with a light hand so that the ink only ends up on the raised areas, leaving this beautiful textured background. Keep in mind, a lot of these techniques will look better when we've trimmed the paper down and add them onto cards. So just be patient and you'll see those come together soon. Okay, so now I'm working again on Tim Holtz watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper would work. And I'm applying direct to paper different colors of these reactive inks. Remember how I said that these inks do fun things with water? Well, these are super smooth, and when you add water, they move very quickly. Many dye inks do react with water, not all, but some, and they all react to water in a slightly different way. But since this has pigment ink properties to it because it's a hybrid ink, the inks stay very smooth. Here's another way you can do direct to paper. I'm putting lots of the reactive inks directly onto watercolor paper. I then have a round acrylic block here that I'm spraying pretty generously with water. And I'm going to press that right down on the center and leave it there for a few minutes. What this does is it creates a beautiful blend where it gets those inks moving together, and check out the center of that. This is a great way to get that soft blended color that many of us like from watercolor, but often struggle with, at least I do. I wanted to add a little more variation to this, so I put a little bit of the blue reactive ink right onto my acrylic block, and then added some water to it and pressed it down lightly onto my watercolor piece here. This is going to create just a little bit of variation and build up of color. After I heat set that, I'm putting some of the sea salt white reactive ink onto my acrylic block. You can see it's not much, but I'll spray that with water and press that on top too. This will soften the colors in different areas. Now these inks are different from Distress Oxide inks in that the regular colors don't have that white oxidation when you wet them, which I think is super fun. These are more of a hybrid ink that when you add water, the color softens in certain areas. I really like both of the inks, and I find that I could probably use them together, but today I wanted to focus on this new ink because I've been getting a lot of questions. Okay, so here I'm doing another direct to paper of lots of the reactive inks. Then I am once again spraying a circle block with water and then adding that right on top, and I'll set that there for a few minutes. When I come back and remove it, you can see how that area is much softer in the center. So it's fun to see the vibrant color on the edges and the soft color in the middle where it's blended together nicely. And remember, you can do these direct to paper with water techniques with many different dye inks, so try what you have. And it also works with Distress ink and Distress Oxide inks. Okay, next I wanted to just show you how other inks work for this, and ink cubes are great for direct to paper. Here I have some Hero Arts Shadow ink cubes, and I'm simply dragging the ink along my paper. This is regular white cardstock. So you can get some fun stripe looks. Again, if you want solid color, just press firmly or drag the ink a few more times. However, I would like to have that bit of gradient. It's one of the fun things about this technique. Another thing you can do with your little cubes is to press them onto paper as if they were square stamps, and you can quickly create a fun diamond pattern on your card. So as you can see, there are many fun ways to do direct to paper techniques. These are just a few, but let's go ahead and take some of these and turn them into simple cards. Okay, let's start with this example here where I have one of the colorful backgrounds that I created by dragging ink in a circular motion. I'm using, as I mentioned today, lots of the Hero Arts stamps that they brought from the vault. So these are older classic images that they're bringing back, and there is something really fun about using those classic images that I started with years ago. Hero Arts actually sent me the prototypes of the stamps, so that's why I'm showing the images instead, so you can better see all of what's included. I also am using the Hero Arts Circle Infinity die set, which I've used in many videos. This is a great essential set that's not too expensive, that includes lots of circle dies. Now I'm using my MISTI stamping tool just to get things lined up, but you definitely could use an acrylic block instead. I have one of the larger circle dies on a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock. In the center of the circle die, I've lined up a sentiment and a birthday cake from the stamp set that I just showed you, and I'm inking up with black ink and stamping it right onto the cardstock. I just put the circle die there just to help me center everything nicely. Now I have the coordinating die for the cake, and I'm taping that in place temporarily with purple tape, and then also taping on that same circle die. I'm going to run this through my die cut machine with partial die cutting. I don't want to cut this completely, so I can create a fun window. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum, but any die cut machine would work. I really like this machine as an option for a manual machine that has a hand crank. Notice that I've put only part of my cardstock underneath the top clear cutting plate. So most of my cake die, but not all, and a lot of my circle die are under the plate, but the bottom of the cake die and the bottom of the circle are hanging out. That means only what's under the top cutting plate will cut, so I'll get a partial die cut, as you can see here. So I have the top of my circle cut and the top of the cake. Next, I'm using my trimmer to cut to connect where the die cutting stops. Now, if you don't have a trimmer like this where you can cut to connect those stopping points of the die cutting, you could instead use a straight edge and a craft knife. But check out that fun partial die cut window that we get. It creates a nice smooth piece that will allow some of this inked piece to show from behind. So I have this partially a circular direct-to-paper inked piece that I created that works perfect behind this. I didn't want this to go to waste, but I wanted to add some texture to it. So here I have a Spellbinders Embossing Mat. It's a flexible mat that works with most die cut machines that allows you to emboss with a die instead of die cut. So I put my inked paper down, and I put the Hues Circle Confetti die on top, and then the Spellbinders embossing plate. And this will cause that background die to press into my cardstock instead of cut, giving it this fun confetti texture. Okay, so let's go ahead and assemble this. I'm putting some adhesive on the back of my inked piece, holding it behind the window, and then pressing it down onto a piece of white cardstock. That's just some thin white cardstock that will hold all these pieces together before we add it to our card. I originally thought I was going to put foam tape behind that piece. That's why I added it onto that instead of the note card. Okay, so I added craft tape or foam tape to the back of our die cut panel, and I'll line that up. And then I added all of this to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch black note card that I made with Hero Art's pitch black cardstock. That is definitely my favorite black cardstock. It's nice and dark and super thick. And I also added a white panel on the inside, so I had a place to write my message. So here you can see the final result. I created a very simple background using direct-to-paper, but I added texture by embossing with a die and added some fun by using partial die cutting to create that window. I have another card to show you. This one uses a similar partial die cutting technique, but I did it off-center. I used the Hero Arts From the Vault Realistic Animals. I thought that giraffe was so fantastic, and I also like the cats on the pillow and that cute little frog on top. So for this, I did partial die cutting with that giraffe image in a circle, but off to center on my white panel. Now that colored piece behind it, that is direct to paper. That was where I just press inked pads down onto white cardstock. So I just lightly pressed it down a few times using pool and green inks. And you can see that linen texture look that we get with that very quick technique. I also added a few gemstones and put everything onto a white note card. Here's another example using the same technique. This time I just did partial die cutting with the circle alone. And I used a larger circle die to make an impression around that. I also added a hello die cut with black cardstock, and then the You Are Precious to Me sentiment, which I'll show you in just a moment. The inked background was again created using that direct-to-paper circular motion, and I have another card with that later on in this video. I just really like the results of that quick technique. Okay, so let's do another style of window card using one of our inked backgrounds. In this case, I used my favorite from this new release. This is the Hero Arts From the Vault Beach and Sea stamp set. I really like the classic timeless images in this. Then I also used sentiments from the Hero Arts From the Vault Cute Animals stamp set. This has that You're Precious to Me sentiment included. I also am using the Hero Arts Wave and Sea Confetti die. I really like these background dies because you can cut with them or emboss with them. So I have a coordinating die for the dolphin image from the stamp set that I just showed you. And I'm taping it in place on the bottom of a piece of white cardstock. And I ran it through my die cut machine to cut that window. I now am using my embossing mat and that waves die to make an impression of that die onto our white die cut panel. This is such a fast technique and gives easy texture to a simple card. Next, I wanted to stamp on acetate. I'm using Judikins Embossable window plastic, but you can try heat embossing on whatever plastic you may have or acetate that you may have left over from recycling. The key is to use your anti-static powder tool very generously on it. Then you ink up your stamp with VersaMark ink and stamp it, and then add your embossing powder, being sure to knock off all of the excess. Then you want to make sure your heat gun is very good and hot before bringing it to your embossing powder. Keep the heat gun moving so that you don't warp your acetate. And then you can buff away the excess anti-static powder. Now on the back of my die cut panel, I'm putting some adhesive around the opening, and then I will line up my acetate stamped piece with that die cut window. This is one of my favorite techniques for using stamps and coordinating dies. Now the colored piece that I'm using, I'm going to freeze frame here. This is that one that we put direct to paper colors down, sprayed it with water, and let it dry. And you can see the pretty color that we get there. Not much of this will show through our die cut window, but I really like the results. Next, I forgot I needed to add a stamp sentiment. I should have stamped this before I did the embossing with that waves die, but I didn't think of it. So I'm just stamping lightly on top and then using a black pen to fill in the letters, and I don't think anyone will ever know. Okay, so now I have a piece of white craft foam that is slightly smaller than our white die cut panel with the dolphin window, and I use that dolphin coordinating die to cut from the bottom of it. This piece of white craft foam will give us some raised dimension. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the top of it, and then lining up the front of our card with that. That way, when I glue all this together, the dolphin that I heat emboss on the acetate will be raised from the colorful background, allowing it to stand out more. Now, you could definitely make this as a shaker card. Most of today's cards where I use the acetate would be great as shaker cards, but I decided not to add anything in there and just let the color show through. I added this all onto a note card that I made with Hero Arts cardstock, and then I also added some light blue gems. I love this dolphin image, and I thought that this technique was perfect for it because it kept the focus on that image. I have another card using that same classic Hero Arts stamp set. This time I used a sentiment and a mermaid. I again white heat embossed those on acetate, and then I put it behind a die cut circle window for a very simple card design. Now that inked piece in the background was the one where we did the reactive inks direct to paper onto watercolor. And then I added the wet acrylic block on top. Once that was dry, I added some more ink and some more water. And it gives a gorgeous, soft watercolor look. I thought that was perfect for the background of this image, and then I also added a few gemstones. I kept all of today's cards simple. I wanted to go with that classic card design with the classic images and a classic technique. Here's another card design that's very similar. This time, that colorful piece in the background is the one where we did direct to paper onto the textured side of watercolor, and I love that look. It's so much fun and so fast to do. I also white heat embossed on acetate using the same Hero Arts stamp set. Underneath that, I stamped a happy hello with the Hero Arts Reactive ink, and you can see how that ink stamps beautifully because it has both dye and pigment ink properties. I have one more example where I white heat embossed on acetate and put that over a window with the colorful piece behind. This time I used the Hero Arts Serene Sun stamp. This is a wood block stamp that stamps beautifully every time. Along with that, I used the Hero Arts 12-point Star Infinity die set, which I've used in many videos. I love the unique shape of all of these dies. So I die cut one of the stars from white cardstock, and I'm putting adhesive on the back so that I can line up this sun that I white heat embossed on acetate. I then can trim off the excess, and I have another one of my direct to paper circle images there, you can see, that I'm putting behind it. So that was a very fast way to create a bunch of color that will peek out from this sun window. I assembled those pieces with craft foam onto a black note card that I once again created with Hero Arts pitch black cardstock. I like to use that little bit of black showing around the edge when I have a white card with pop of color on it. A simple card design like that, it really kind of pulls everything together. Actually, I do have one more where I do a window with heat embossing on acetate. This time I used the Hero Arts From the Vault Bugs stamp set. I really like the butterfly in here and the style of the sentiments included. I also used the Hero Arts Butterfly Confetti die to emboss on my background. So here's the card. It comes together just like all of the other examples that I've shown. I white heat embossed the butterfly on acetate and added a simple thank you sentiment to the front of it. Behind the acetate, I have my direct paper piece that I made using the ink cubes. So quick to make and adds that pop of color. Now on the white die cut window panel, I embossed with that butterfly confetti die for a bit of texture. On a simple card like that, embossing of a white panel makes a big difference. Okay, we're in the home stretch. This is our last card for today, and I did something a little out of the box for me. This features the Hero Arts From the Vault Celestial stamp set, which has beautiful classic images. And I also used the older Hero Arts Acts of Kindness stamp set. This is one that I helped Hero Arts come up with where part of the profits are donated to an anti-bullying campaign. I just used the small thank you sentiment on my card. So this background is the one that I created earlier by doing direct to paper of Hero Arts Reactive inks onto Tim Holtz watercolor paper. I then put water on a round acrylic block and set it on the center and let it dry. That's what causes the smooth look in the center, but we have that rough texture on the outside. Normally I would trim off that rough texture, but I thought it would be fun to leave it and try something new. And I just die cut a circle frame to go around it to give it a little bit of definition. In the center, I white heat embossed the sun and added the simple thank you message. Sometimes it's fun to try something that's a little different for you. I hope you'll try that too. Okay, so there you have a bunch of direct-to-paper inking techniques, an oldie but goodie technique that I hope you enjoy. If you're interested in any of the supplies I used today, they are linked below in my YouTube description, as I always do. And in the middle are a couple other videos that I think you might enjoy also. I appreciate all the time that you spend with me. It's something that I can never say enough. I thank you so much. I hope you have a good day, and we'll see you again soon.